I bring it up a surprising amount.
Yeah, almost too much, some people might say. Welcome to another episode of the Nerds You're Looking For podcast, a weekly nerd culture podcast that discusses nerddom through various segments. You can find us at thenerdspodcast.com and can follow us on Instagram and Twitter through our handle at the Nerds Podcast. If you'd like to reach us directly, including sending us suggestions for our nerd favorite segment, you can email us at thenerdsyou'relooking4@gmail.com. Additionally, we have a YouTube page under the Nerds You're Looking For banner, and each of us has a Letterboxd account, which is basically social media for watching movies. On Letterboxd, I'm at that Tyler Hunt, and my co-host Pat can be found at the Nerds Podcast. With all of that being said, and without further ado, alongside me, as always, is my co-host, Pat Attack. How's it going, dude?
I'm good. The last couple of days have actually been kind of depressing because I do this every week, every year. It's like I have amnesia. So I think it's usually about the last week of September, my wife and I put up all of our Halloween decorations. And it's like, it's so weird when I put them up. I'm like, oh man, I'm going to go all out this year. Like, I mean, we have a lot of Halloween decorations because I love the season. And so we put them up and I'm just like, this is how we live now. Like, this is it. Like, we're never going to have to take these down. Like, I go all out. And then the last couple of days we've been taking them down. It's just a pain in the ass because I'm super lazy. And I'm also kind of bummed that Halloween's over. So it's just like, I've been kind of depressed the last couple of days.
Yeah, man, that sucks. I hate it too. We carved pumpkins this year and we carved them like 2 weeks ago. So by the time Halloween came around, they were looking pretty rough.
Yeah.
And so the day after Halloween, I was like, all right, it's time to get rid of these fucking things. And I didn't really know what to do with them. I guess I could have put them in the trash, but instead there's like some woods behind my house. So I just pitched them back there and got them out of my life. And I wish that all of my Halloween decorations were that easily removable. But unfortunately, I think that's something my wife and I are doing today, is going through and taking down all the stuff we put up.
Yeah, we started it last night before we went and saw the movie that we're going to review, and we're only like halfway through because by the time we got home, we were just like, we don't really feel like it, and I didn't really do anything this morning, so it was just kind of that they're halfway taken down, but we go all out for Halloween, somewhat for Christmas too. My wife loves Christmas pretty much the same way that I love Halloween, so we don't really decorate for any other I almost said holidays. We don't really decorate. I just had a stroke there. No, we don't really decorate for many holidays except for Halloween and Christmas, because that's my favorite is Halloween, and obviously my wife's favorite is Christmas. So, we got a little bit of time to take down the Halloween decorations, I guess, but I mean, she'll probably within the next week or so be asking me when we're going to put up the Christmas decorations.
Yeah, that's how I am. Like, I think that there's so much effort that you put into Christmas decorations. I know you said you guys go out for Halloween, like all out, but with Christmas, you have to decorate a tree and all of that kind of shit. And I'd rather get like 2 months out of it than 1 month. So I'm the type of person who's like, all right, the Halloween's coming down. Let's just put the Christmas up. I don't think we'll honestly do that, but I wouldn't be opposed to just getting it over with now.
We actually have 2 Christmas trees that we decorate.
See, that's a ton of fucking work for like a few weeks of enjoyment. So why not start in earlier November? Like, I know people bitch about that, but who gives a fuck?
Yeah, I'm already seeing all of those memes on Facebook about how, like, oh, you shouldn't talk about Christmas until the end of November. And I kind of gotten to the point where I don't really have like a hot take on that. I just let people like what they want to like, man. Who gives a shit? Like, I've been talking about Halloween since like the middle of September. Like, who gives a shit? Like, that's what I love. And I don't really like make fun of my wife or anything like that for liking Christmas as much as I like Halloween. It's just like, I don't ever get that. Like, let people like what they like, man. Who gives a shit? If it bothers you, then just unfollow that person for a little bit.
It's not like you're going to your neighbor's house and like putting up their fucking Christmas tree for them and saying like,
exactly.
now you look at this all month.
Yeah, it's silly. People are silly, man.
For sure, man. One thing I do want to preface this episode with is that I am getting over a cold. So I've listened to podcasts before where the host, like clears their throat a lot or coughs a lot, and it's super fucking annoying. So I am going to try my hardest not to do that this episode, but to do that, I may have to use some cough drops. So I'm going to try to do that, during segments where I'm not speaking. So when like Pat's going through what he's into in his comics, but just a heads up, it might sound like I've got like nuts in my mouth or something, but it's not. It's just a cough drop.
See, the funny thing about that is you didn't tell me that before we started recording because we're not actually friends. We don't actually talk to each other before recording. But I didn't even notice that there was anything like you can't hear it in your voice. Maybe that's just because I barely listen to you when you talk.
That's probably it. But I'm on the downswing of it, so I should be good. Yesterday was a bit rough, and I was getting a bit nervous for the podcast today, but I feel pretty good this morning, so should be good.
Cool, man. So if this is your first episode, we start off each episode by kind of just checking in with each other. We call it What We're Into. It's going to be a little bit different. So for the past couple of episodes, we've been recapping our Shocktober. For those that aren't aware, Shocktober is just a celebration of the horror genre and Halloween, where Tyler and I try to watch a horror movie every day. I did not do it this Shocktober, which we'll get into here in a second. And so for the sake of completionism, I guess, that's not a word for sure, we're going to kind of put a cap on that, and then we're going to go into what we're into. So it's going to be real quick. We'll talk about each other's Shocktobers, and then we'll get into what we're actually into for this episode. So from here on out, until we decided to do something else goofy with what we're into, it'll just be a regular what we're into from now on. But we wanted to kind of put a cap on our Shocktobers since we've talked about it for the last couple of weeks. So I'm pretty sure I know for a fact you had a better Shocktober than I did.
Yeah, so just to put a cap on it, if you guys listened last week, you'll know that I fell behind one, but was not worried at all about getting caught up. And I did, in fact, get caught up. So I watched 6 movies after we got done recording last week, and just because Shocktober's over and everybody's moved on to Christmas, hopefully, I'll go ahead and be pretty quick with the 6 movies I wrapped up with. So last week after we recorded, I watched It, the 2017 version, which is of course amazing. That same night, I also watched Raw, which was my first time ever watching that, and it's always at the top of those lists if you search like best horror movies on Netflix. So I think that it's a French movie, if I remember correctly. So I had to obviously read the subtitles because I don't speak French, but that movie gets a lot of praise, and I honestly don't think it was that great. So if you disagree, let me know. But I watched Raw. The next night, my wife and I watched Unsane, which was a movie that came out earlier this year that I really wanted to see, and I really liked that one quite a bit. It's shot entirely on an iPhone, which I thought was a cool bit of trivia, but it's really good. My wife and I then watched a movie called From a House on Willow Street, which is not good. It's basically about these people that kidnapped this girl, and it turns out that she's possessed by a demon, and she starts picking them off one by one, and it sounds cooler than it actually is. It's actually not that great. The next night, I watched Shaun of the Dead, which, I mean, what can I say about Shaun of the Dead that's not already been said? It's amazing. And then what's become kind of a tradition for me on Halloween, I finished up my Shocktober with Trick or Treat, which is the quintessential Halloween movie, in my opinion. It still holds up, still great. So that's how I ended my Shocktober. I was 31 for 31, and I'm proud of it. So as far as what I'm actually into this week, I wanted to talk about Call of Duty Black Ops 4. This is a game that I've been playing for about a week and a half now, and it's the first Call of Duty game I've played since Advanced Warfare, if you can believe that. So it's been a few years since I've kind of dived into any of these games. So I do want to start with what's kind of been the biggest point of conversation with this game, and that's that this is only multiplayer. There is no campaign in Black Ops 4. It comes with the classic multiplayer that has always been present in these games. There's the zombies mode, which I know you're a pretty big fan of, Pat. And then there's Blackout, which is the new Battle Royale version of Call of Duty that I'll get into in a little bit. But yeah, that's the first big thing, right? So no campaign. And I honestly don't know how others have felt about this because I've not looked at reviews and I haven't talked to a ton of other people that are playing this game, but everyone I have played this game with has shared my opinion, which is that it doesn't really matter. There have been some Call of Duty campaigns that have been really great, like I think back to Modern Warfare 2, but most of the time, for me at least, it's just an obstacle that I felt like I've had to do since I bought the game, but when in reality, all I actually want to do is play the multiplayer. But obviously, we've talked about being completionists and needing to complete a game, so the story mode always kind of lingers and stresses me out with whether I'm going to finish the campaign or not. So I did not miss it, but I can understand how some people might be upset because you pay $60 for a game that's always had a campaign and now it's not there. So again, it may not be a popular opinion, but I compare it to a game like Halo. So this is probably a little bit more controversial, but I feel the same way about that franchise, if I'm being honest, because in Halo, I'm more interested in multiplayer than the campaign, even though the campaign in Halo is much better than Call of Duty. So anyways, that's a long way of saying that I'm not going to knock the game any points because there's no campaign. So with that being said, I do want to talk about the features that the game actually does have, which of course, first up is multiplayer. So there are differing options you can choose from when jumping into a multiplayer game, but like 90% of the players out there, I'm pretty much just stuck with Team Deathmatch. It's your standard Call of Duty fare. There are tweaks here and there. What I will say is that I think that there's a reason people continue to play Team Deathmatch year in and year out with these games, and it's because it's a ton of fun. In Black Ops 4, it's extremely fast-paced, even faster than I remember Call of Duty being, since it's been a few years since I played Call of Duty. There's no flying around or double jumping or anything like that, which I remember from Advanced Warfare. But even though the movement may have slowed down a bit, the gameplay speed has not. It's definitely super quick-paced. It took a few rounds for me to definitely get back into the swing of things, which was a bit frustrating, but it's been fun ever since. So, like I said, there were some other changes to multiplayer here and there. For example, health doesn't auto-regenerate anymore. So healing is manual. You have to tap the LB button if you're playing on Xbox, and there's a cooldown between how much you can and can't heal. Also, at the beginning of the round, you select from 10 specialist characters, and each have different abilities, and they have super moves and different loadouts, all of those things. So, for example, not everyone has grenades anymore. If you want a grenade, you have to pick the specialist that comes with that loadout. You can also pick different classes as well, and you can mix and match classes with the specialists, so loadouts don't necessarily differ from a gun standpoint, but you can pick the class with a gun you want for whichever specialist you choose. It's more so for secondary weapons and abilities, as far as like the specialist goes, like why that's important. For example, the other abilities that the specialists have besides like things like grenades include things like razor wire, sending out an attack dog. One of the characters has a grappling hook. All of these abilities have a cooldown, but it's a bit different from most team deathmatch experiences. I do think that they probably tried to make this too much like Overwatch, where you pick a different character and act as a tank or play defensive or play offensive. And while I definitely appreciate that thought process, at the end of the day in multiplayer, especially on Call of Duty, everybody just typically plays offensive, and all of that stuff that they had kind of tweaked and planned kind of goes out the window. So for me, it doesn't really matter in the long run too much, but it's a fun add-on, I guess. So, the next up as far as the gameplay options is zombies. I've only played zombies once on Call of Duty 4, but they've definitely put more focus into this game mode from what I remember it used to be, how it used to be. The concept seems to be the same. It's wave after wave, until you and your squad dies, but there is definitely more to do from an environmental perspective. It's definitely fun, but I haven't dug into it quite enough yet. And then, the last game type is Blackout, which again, like I said earlier, is the Battle Royale version of Call of Duty that is, of course, here because of the popularity of PUBG and Fortnite. And while it's 1000% a ripoff of those games and the parallels to Fortnite are obvious and cheap, this game type does work and it's a lot of fun. I guess that's not too big of a surprise because Fortnite works and it's fun as well, and it's essentially Fortnite in Call of Duty land. But if you're not familiar with those game types, basically 100 players fall into a map and try to outlive each other. Unlike multiplayer, there are vehicles in this game type, which ups the ante quite a bit, and the map is huge. Like this game was a big download, pretty much just from the standpoint that the Blackout map is so big. It's kind of funny. Like I laughed quite a bit about how similar this is to other Battle Royale games, especially Fortnite. But again, it works and it's fun. And honestly, that's all that matters. For example, on Fortnite, Pat, as you know from whenever we were doing Fortnite Fridays, I suck at building to the point that I don't really do it. So I appreciate that there's no building in this game. And honestly, I'm starting to prefer it anyways. There are other things I can get into with this game, like the contraband system or some of the things that you can do from a customization standpoint. But for the sake of time and the fact that those things don't really matter too incredibly much, I'll just kind of leave it there. Overall, I did not anticipate buying this game. I did not have any plans to buy this game until a friend pressured me into buying it. But honestly, I'm glad I did. It's been fun, and it's definitely a game I'm going to play on and off for a while.
So you mentioned the campaign, and yeah, I pretty much decided that I wasn't going to buy this game because it didn't have a campaign. I do quite enjoy the campaigns in all games, really. Halo, we definitely disagree. I think the campaigns are really good. I might be in the minority there, but I really enjoy the Halo campaigns quite a lot. I will say that I never beat Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, and it just became backwards compatible a couple of months ago, and I streamed it for a couple of nights, and then I just recently, off stream, beat it on my own, and I think altogether I might have played it for like 5 or 6 hours. And I can't remember the campaigns being that short. Like, I remember Modern Warfare 2, or not Modern Warfare 2, but Modern Warfare, the first one, didn't seem like it was that quick. Maybe it was, maybe I'm wrong, but I know that Call of Duty World War II, which is the most recent before Black Ops 4, it seemed like it took about 11 or 12 hours. So even for me, that campaign seems kind of short. Like, I'm looking for more like 18 or 20 hours, to be honest with you. But like you said, with these Call of Duty games and Halo, the campaigns don't really matter that much. I think for most people, I know that a lot of people don't even play them. So I guess it makes sense that they wouldn't put too much time and effort into generating a really good campaign. I thought the World War II campaign was pretty good. It had a few really intense moments that I enjoyed. There was some stealth missions that got kind of annoying when you wanted to go back and play them on veteran. But other than that, I thought it was pretty good. So, yeah, I was a little bit disappointed that it wasn't, or it didn't have, Black Ops 4 didn't have a campaign. But honestly, there's so many games that I've bought in the last couple of months that I haven't really played that much that I need to play. Like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, I've only played that for a few hours. And then, of course, Red Dead Redemption 2 just came out, and I'm going to be streaming that starting next week. So, yeah, there's too much going out right now, like coming out and going on right now, that I'm not going to get this game anytime soon. But the Battle Royale does seem like it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is, for sure. What are you into, though?
All right, so to get my Shocktober recap out of the way, it's probably, I mean, not probably, it is, this has been the worst Shocktober I've had since I started celebrating it. I think I started the Shocktober right before we started the podcast, so I've been doing it for like 5 years now, and this is definitely the worst I've ever done. So I only had 21 films, if you count Shocktober in Irvington, which I do, and I also saw Halloween twice. So that was, all in all, was 21, which obviously I fell way short of the 31 that we aspire to. I will say, and I talked about this a little bit last episode, I did watch The Haunting of Hill House, which is 10 episodes, and they're about 45 minutes to an hour long. So kind of what we said last week, which is basically 2 of those episodes equal 1 movie. So if you count that plus the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, which I also watched and got done before Halloween. So I guess technically, if you count that, I got my 31, but not really, because as we kind of talked about last episode, I know, Tyler, you started The Haunting, but you haven't finished it yet. There are episodes here and there that are a little bit slower and more character-driven than horror. So it's like if you just, the first two are my movie for today. Well, if you get to episode like 3 or 4 and they're not as horror driven, it's like, you just watched a really cool character study, but it didn't really make a difference as far as horror is concerned. But all in all, I mean, I did watch those 2 shows and they are horror related, especially The Haunting. Sabrina, not so much. Like I said last week, it's more like horror adjacent. They really lean into the witch part of Sabrina in that show. But especially towards the end, it gets more like teen drama and like almost not really rom-com, but there's a lot of like teen drama stuff and I've never seen Riverdale, so I don't know if that's how that show is. I'm assuming that show is like that as well, but it just seemed like I didn't really care what who Sabrina was gonna date and all this other stuff. Like, there's not a ton of that, but it definitely gets away from the horror aspect. And then the last episode, it does kind of try to get back to it, and there's a big finale. But at that point, I didn't particularly care so much about the show. So I will never watch another season of this show. I kind of basically just watched the last 2 episodes while I was on my phone because it didn't really interest me anymore. But since I was already like 8 episodes into a 10-episode season, I was like, I might as well finish it. So I wouldn't necessarily advise anybody, especially if you're looking for more horror, to watch The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. So, that was my Shocktober. Definitely the worst I've ever had. But, I have been waiting to talk about Big Mouth Season 2 for a while now. I kind of mentioned that, I don't know if it was last episode or maybe a couple episodes ago, that one good thing about Shocktober, other than watching all these great horror movies, is the fact that we always have those episodes every once in a while where it's like, we got to find something to talk about. Like, we haven't really watched a whole lot this week. It was a busy week for one reason or the other. And, this Shocktober has kind of allowed me to kind of build up my list of things I want to talk about, because I've watched a lot of other things other than horror movies. And Big Mouth Season 2 was the first one that I wanted to talk about. So I already have a list of like 3 or 4 things that I will bring up in the next couple of episodes. So Big Mouth Season 2, if you're not already aware, is an animated show, but it's kind of like in the vein of Simpsons and South Park and Bob's Burgers and stuff like that, where it's animated, but it's geared more towards adults, which, again, I don't know if I've talked about this before on the podcast, but my wife refuses to watch adult cartoons, is what she calls them. And I think that's so silly, because I absolutely love this show. Like, I'm really trying to get her to watch this show because it's so fantastic. So the first season really did such an awesome job at portraying what it's like to go through puberty. Like, that's basically the whole show. And they have these hormone monsters that kind of portray the kids, obviously their hormones. And I didn't really know where they were going to go in season 2, because there was a couple of moments in season 1, especially where this one character fucks a pillow, and it's like he's dating this pillow, and then they end up having a little pillow baby. It's really fucking stupid. And so I was like, well, I hope that they don't go like completely overboard. Like, I hope season 2 isn't just that. And it kind of starts with them kind of getting rid of that pillow storyline, which I'm glad that they got rid of it, and it doesn't really come up too much in season 2, but they added something to this season, which I think is fantastic. So basically, not only do they have hormone monsters, but they also, and I can't remember, it's been a couple of weeks since I watched the show, I can't remember what they call him. Oh, the Shame Wizard is what they call him. And basically, he's essentially, well, I mean, it's kind of in his name, like, he's to shame everybody into like being embarrassed on what they do. And I thought that was fantastic. Just that they brought that aspect into it, because obviously that plays a huge role when you're in high school and you're awkward and you're going through this horrible time with all these hormones, and the fact that it's probably pretty easy to feel shame. So I thought that was pretty cool. And they also, it's towards the end of the season, but I hope it's something that they bring up in season 3 as well, is they tackle depression in one episode really, really well. and it's kind of like a shisher cat situation. And I thought that was done really well. And I always think that that's such an important thing to talk about that a lot of shows and movies and video games don't really talk about that much. I will say that there's a game that I streamed for a while called Celeste that does it really, really well, that tackles depression really, really well. So also it's a great platformer if you like platforming games as well. So, I think anytime a show or TV or video game or whatever can tackle something so complex like depression and do it in such a simple and really just genius way, it's definitely gonna resonate with me. So Big Mouth Season 2, definitely watch it. I mean, obviously watch the first season if you haven't already, but it's definitely a show that I think everybody should watch because, I mean, it kind of relates to everybody. Everybody had to go through this. So you're either going through it now or you've already gone through it. So I think it definitely is gonna resonate with a lot of people, and it's quickly becoming one of my favorite shows on television right now.
Yeah, I'm going to have to watch this one, man. I almost watched the first season, and there were a couple nights where Brittany and I almost started the first season, and we just never got around to it. But the more you talk about it, the more it sounds like it's really well done, and it's not just some cheap adult animated show on Netflix, and that there's a little bit more depth to it. So it's something that I do plan to check out.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like I said, it's quickly becoming one of my favorite shows, and the fact that my wife won't watch it really irritates the shit out of me. She says it's because, well, I mean, she doesn't like adult cartoons, but also she doesn't like Nick Kroll, which I can relate to that because I'm not a huge Nick Kroll fan, but apparently the sound of his voice, she says that she can only hear the douche from Parks and Rec, which obviously that makes sense because that's Nick Kroll as well. But I'm just like, you need to get past that because it's such a good show. She also won't watch Bob's Burgers because she doesn't who does Gene in Bob's Burgers?
His name's actually Eugene, but I can't remember his last name.
I can't remember. He's a really hilarious stand-up comedian. And if you haven't watched his stand-up, you definitely should. But she refuses to watch Bob's Burgers with me because she can't stand the sound of his voice either. So she's very weird. She like immediately just like throws things away just for like weird reasons that I don't understand.
Yeah, that's weird, man.
Yeah, for sure. But definitely watch Big Mouth. It's awesome.
For sure. So you ready for comments?
Yeah, what'd you read this week?
So I read a new comic called Hex Wives. So Hex Wives #1, written by Ben Blacker and drawn by Mirka and Dolfo. So this is put out by Vertigo, which is, I'm assuming, after reading this comic, like the dirty DC line. This book curses a ton and even has some nudity, so it's like DC After Dark, essentially. But as you can probably tell from the word hex in the comic's title, the series is about magic and witches and how men have attempted to subdue witches for centuries. So this comic starts in Salem in 1692 during the Salem witch trials and then follows different cases of violence against witches for the following centuries. Basically, the witches themselves always reincarnate, and the group of men that hunt them, which are called the architects, continue to hunt them and either kill them or get killed by them. So usually this would end up going pretty poorly for the architects because the witches are blood witches whose power is amplified by violence. So the men were typically on the losing side of these battles, and it's basically this violent cycle that repeats itself century after century that was basically going to repeat itself till the end of time. However, Aaron, who is a member of the current iteration of architects, hatches a plan that is finally looks like it's going to break that cycle because, they kill these witches and they just come right back. So the details of his plan aren't explained just yet, but we do see the ramifications of what he did. And basically, instead of going through the repetition of killing and being killed by the witches, they've managed to almost hypnotize them into being a sort of housewife that doesn't really know their true power. And that's kind of where the book ends, is with a look into those lives. So overall, it sounds more convoluted than it probably actually is, but I would say that I really enjoyed this book. I am a fan of witch stories, especially when they're done right, and this book definitely does something unique with the idea of witches. I also appreciate there's a lot of diversity in this book. And while I didn't really get into specific characters in my recap besides Aaron, the story does follow two witches that seem to be our main protagonists, and they're named Nadia and Izzy, and they are in love every time they reincarnate. And additionally, Izzy is one of only 2 white women in the entire story, so diversity is obviously an important aspect of the culture of this book and what it's trying to create, which is, of course, appreciated. With that being said, Hex Wives is not a subtle comic. Its political and social messages are not cleverly disguised. They're pretty obvious. It pretty much beats you over the head with what misogyny has and does look like, and it explores the ideas of how men have oppressed women for centuries. And this is not something, like I said, that is a hidden message. It's very obvious. It does come in an important moment of time during the Me Too movement and all that good stuff. And while I typically don't like to be force-fed political messages, even if they are ones that I agree with, I think that this book does it extremely well. And through a supernatural story that is sure to be a lot of fun going forward. The art of this book is also really great. It's violent and it's drawn very well. But yeah, I think that this is a unique story that has legs, and I'm curious to see how the story develops going forward. So I don't know. I don't think this is a miniseries. I think this is an ongoing. So I'm going to keep up with it until it makes me want to not read it anymore. So for now, it's definitely going to be in my rotation of books because I really did like this first issue.
Yeah, I had actually forgotten that you were into witches. I knew, obviously, werewolves, but I had forgotten about the witches because you've talked about witch comic books before. You might actually enjoy Sabrina a little bit more than I did. My wife is currently rewatching the old Melissa Joan Hart. Is that her name?
Yes, it is.
Show. She's currently, I mean, she's probably watching it as we speak, as we record it. She was watching it this morning when I was prepping for this episode, so I'm sure she's still watching it. And I think I said this a couple episodes ago, like, it wasn't quite the horror that I wanted it to be. Like, it definitely leans into more about her being a witch than the other show does, but it's not as funny and just like lighthearted as the original show. And so it's not what either one of us wanted. I wanted the more horror, which it doesn't really lean in that hard to it. And then she really wanted the kind of the campy witch stuff, and you don't get really any of that in the new show. So yeah, I'd be interested to see what you thought of Sabrina, because I forgot that you really liked witches. I think you probably have similar thoughts as I do, because obviously we usually agree on a lot of things. That's why we're friends. Well, just kidding. We're not really friends. No. So I'd be interested to see what you thought of that. I'm sure you'll never watch it though.
Yeah, I may watch it when things slow down and there's not a ton of new content coming out in places that I'm interested in, but I really could give two shits about like Riverdale and the teen angst of it all. So
yeah, then you would hate it. There's a lot of that towards the end of the show.
So I don't know. I'll probably watch it someday, but it's definitely not something that I'll start watching tonight or anything.
All right. So there's a new Planet of the Apes comic book called The Time of Man. So anybody that gets tired of me talking about Planet of the Apes, you can skip ahead because that's what I'm going to be talking about. So it got put out by Boom Studios, which is the publisher that normally puts out Planet of the Apes. I'm sure they have some license with the whoever owns the rights of Planet of the Apes, because they're always the publisher that puts it out. So I can kind of take a break from saying the artist and the writer's name, because it's kind of like an annual. So there's actually like 3 short stories, and I'm not going to say every writer and every artist. So if you're interested in this book, which if you're a Planet of the Apes fan, I feel like you should be, because they're both, I think 2 of the 3 stories I really enjoyed. So, the first one is called Armando's Tale, which is kind of fills in the gap in between Escape from the Planet of the Apes and Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, which other than the original Planet of the Apes movie, Conquest is my favorite Planet of the Apes movie out of the originals. So I was pretty excited to see that the first story was going to be kind of filling in this gap. I never really felt like I needed the gap to be filled in, but it was kind of cool to see some backstory on Armando. So definitely, if you're into Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, which you should be because it's a fantastic movie, I think you will definitely appreciate the first short story of The Time of Man. And then the second one is Man's Best Friend, which, I don't know. I didn't particularly like this one. This is the one that it kind of rolled my eyes a little bit while I was reading it, because essentially what happens in Man's Best Friend is kind of, they're kind of telling another Taylor story in the first, I mean, this human gets captured and he is bought by this ape, and essentially it's just the story of how they were very cautious when they bought the human, and as the years go on, he becomes more and more part of the family, and then the human dies, and they're sad, and that's pretty much it. So it wasn't much of a story, and I've honestly, since we've had this franchise for so long, I've seen other stories like it that I thought were done a little bit better. And it's not necessarily that this story was bad, it was just, okay, I've seen it before. So I kind of talked about that a little bit with Marvel Zombies, maybe been last week or 2 weeks ago. Like, that story wasn't necessarily bad, it's just, I've seen that story done a million other times. So if you're not absolutely, like, blowing me away with the content, then I'm just kind of tune you out a little bit. So that's kind of what I did with Man's Best Friend. And then Mountain was the third one, and this is actually following, I believe it's War for the Planet of the Apes. I mean, it's definitely Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, it's definitely after that, but I think, knowing the timeline as I do, I think it actually happens after War for the Planet of the Apes. And so, basically, the kid in Dawn for the Planet of the Apes has grown up a little bit, and he's with this other family, and they're living in the woods next to this mountain, hence the name of the story. And they come across an ape, and they try to basically communicate with it, and they believe that the disease, the simian flu, has passed, and like, not all apes are infected anymore, because this ape clearly doesn't understand them, but of course he does, and he escapes, and they kind of have to go through the moral dilemma of killing him or not killing him, and all that other stuff. And there's a little bit of a big finale towards the end where they kind of come to their decision, which I thought was kind of interesting. But all in all, kind of like what I said with the second story, it's kind of been done before, and I've kind of seen it before. So all in all, I think, I mean, if you're not a fan of Planet of the Apes, why would you be reading this to begin with? But I think that you kind of have to be hardcore, like I am, to really appreciate this, because if you're just kind of a casual fan, maybe you just like the new movies and you've never seen the originals, then I would probably stay away from this, because it felt like more like supplemental reading.
Yeah, I'm not going to read this, as you could probably expect, but it sounds interesting. I'm not necessarily like somebody who doesn't enjoy Planet of the Apes. It's just, as a person who hasn't even seen all the movies, I'm obviously not going to dig into the comic books, so
that makes sense.
But I'm happy for you, man, that they keep it alive with these. So
yeah, and I will continue to read them every week. So if you like get on Comixology or you get on Midtown and you see that there's a Planet of the Apes book, chances are, as a listener, that I am going to probably read it, and I'm probably going to talk about it on the episode, so that you can either get excited or you can roll your eyes, either one.
At least you guys have the option to skip ahead. I do not have that option. Just kidding, kind of. Okay, so nerd news. So every week we talk about some of the bigger nerd headlines, and there's a couple this week to talk through. The first is that there is going to be a Falcon Winter Soldier TV show on the Disney streaming service, which sounds pretty boring, but I'll watch it for sure, 100%. So.
Is it going to be like a buddy cop situation?
I'm assuming they're just like, hey, remember that one time in Civil War where they kind of gave each other a hard time? Wouldn't that be funny if it was a show? And
is it going to be live action? It's not going to be live. It is?
Yeah, it's with Sebastian Stan and Anthony Mackie.
Man, I mean, they must not have anything going on right now.
Well, this joins I don't think it's been officially announced, but aren't they saying that they're doing like a Scarlet Witch show and a Loki show?
Yeah.
As well. I mean, we talked about that in Nerd News a few weeks ago, so Disney is going all in, man. Like they might have some really good original stuff on there. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm not going to hold my breath for these shows to actually happen, though.
Yeah, we'll see. I think you're right. Although, like, realistically, like, what else has Anthony Mackie been in? Like, this is all he has going for him. And Sebastian Stan, I don't think he's been in anything since I, Tonya, right?
I can't think of anything.
So, we'll see. That brings me to another Marvel tidbit, and it's not really news, but it was something that I thought was really interesting, and I just wanted to bring it to your attention. You may have already seen it because it was on comicbook.com, and I know you go to that site like I do, but Marvel has released something from the Marvel Cinematic Universe every month for the last 16 months, and November will be the first month in 16 months to not have something released. So this, of course, includes TV shows, but between S.H.I.E.L.D., The Inhumans, Cloak and Dagger, all of those shows, and then, of course, the Netflix shows and the movies that have come out, there's been some type of new content released from the Marvel Cinematic Universe since July of 2017.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of crazy to think about, and it's kind of weird that as much as I am a fan of the MCU, I really don't watch a good chunk of it. Like, it's weird because they have so much. Like, we've talked about this before, like, neither one of us watch Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I tried to watch it. I actually tried to rewatch it not too long ago, and I got through the first couple of episodes, and I was like, I'm out. Like, this is it for me. It's just not that interesting to me. And I know they have a ton of other shows. I don't think they count Legion. I don't think that's really part of the MCU, but
no, they don't.
Like, they have, like, the Runaways and the Inhumans. I mean, even though the Inhumans got canceled because it looked like a shit show, but yeah, I mean, that doesn't surprise me that they've released all of that stuff, but at the same time, it does kind of surprise me that neither one of us, being the nerds that you're looking for, have really watched a ton of it.
Yeah, it's just, there's too much, man, to watch that kind of stuff. But anyways, on to the next story. Ewan McGregor is playing Black Mask in the Birds of Prey movie. So, yeah, that's happening. I saw you posted something on Facebook, but I don't remember what your caption was for it.
I said it was the best thing that DC EU has done in a long time. I think he's a really underrated actor, and I really like Black Mask. Like, I mean, there's plenty of other villains that they could have done, obviously, but I think he's a pretty cool villain. He's definitely underused. Like, he doesn't get used very often. He was in the Arkham Origins movie, which is unfortunately, or not movie, video game, which unfortunately is the worst of those games. So I don't know if he's necessarily used all that well in that game either. But, I mean, you kind of have to go with a villain that we've never seen before, and I think that he's a good one to use, and I think he will do an amazing job as that villain. So I'm definitely looking forward to it. Obviously, I don't necessarily feel like I need to go back into how much of a shit show I think the DC extended universe is. But, I mean, you have to start somewhere. Like, if you're going to rebuild this universe, like, this is not a bad place to go.
Yeah, Ewan McGregor is fucking awesome. I love Ewan McGregor.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I think he's a great addition to the cast, which I don't remember every single person that's in it, but obviously Margot Robbie's in it, and Mary Elizabeth Winstead, I believe, is in it as Huntress, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. But either way, we talked about that a few Nerd News ago as they announced the characters that were going to be in this, and I think that they have a pretty cool cast. Apparently it's going to be rated R, which I don't think is a good choice, personally. But, yeah, we'll see if this movie continues to come together. So, Ewan McGregor joining the cast is definitely a good thing. Something that does not sound like a good thing, though, in the final story for Nerd News, is that Ridley Scott is making a sequel to Gladiator.
Yeah, so we've talked about this before, but yeah, it's not going to be good, man. Like, you have, I mean, I don't want to say that Gladiator is his best movie because he did the Alien movie, but I mean, it's definitely up there. Like, you could make an argument that Gladiator's his best movie, and I feel like at a certain point, especially since it's been out for 20 years now or something like that, at a certain point you just fucking leave it alone, man. Like, it's such an amazing movie. Just let it be. Like, things don't need sequels.
Yeah, I know that, I don't know if we've talked about it on the podcast before, but there was like an original pitch for a Gladiator sequel that was going to follow Maximus through hell, through like the rings of hell.
Yeah, we've talked about that before.
Which they are not doing that. This movie is going to follow Lucius, who was the son of Lucilla, who was played by Connie Nielsen, and the nephew of Joaquin Phoenix's character in that movie. So I haven't seen that movie in a while. I'll have to rewatch Gladiator for sure, but you're right. I mean, at this point, why? Obviously, you're not going to bring back fat Russell Crowe because, one, he's dead, and two, he's fat. So, and I don't think that he has the ability to get back into Maximus shape anyways, so.
No, he looks like if Maximus got stung by a bunch of bees.
And then I was going to say, he
ate those bees?
Yeah, but that really honestly wouldn't put on that much weight, so it wasn't. I back out of that joke.
Well, I don't think you understand how podcasts work because you almost made the joke.
Anyways, man, that is all I have for nerd news.
I'm surprised you didn't bring up the Toy Story 4 thing. What? I posted that too.
That's not a story. Like
I
Tom
just
Hanks
wanted
says
to
it's
troll
really
you
sad.
some more.
Tom Hanks said it's really sad.
I hope they die. I actually don't hope that they die, but I just like to mess with you because I know it bothers you.
It doesn't bother me at all.
I feel like your face says a different story.
It's annoying more or less because you continue to bring it up. And then I like how you posted it on Facebook, like all of our Facebook followers or whatever know what you're even talking about. Nobody listens to this goddamn podcast. Nobody knows what your opinion is.
I feel like a good chunk of the people that like us on Facebook listen to the podcast sometimes, and I bring it up a lot. So I feel like probability tells you that eventually you're going to hear me complain about Toy Story 3. I bring it up a surprising amount.
Yeah, almost too much, some people might say.
Would some people be you? Do you think 100%. I bring it up too much?
And I love Toy Story 3, and even I'm saying you bring it up too much.
Fair enough. So, what we kind of teased a little bit, for our main topic this particular episode is we're going to, review Bohemian Rhapsody, which is, or was directed by Bryan Singer, sort of. I thought it was weird that his name was on it and his name was the only one on it because I'm sure we talked about this before when the news first broke, but he actually, I think it was like 2 weeks before the film actually wrapped, he got fired. And then a guy named Dexter Fletcher finished the movie, which he did. I had to look this up because I had never heard his name before. He did Eddie the Eagle, and he's also doing the upcoming Elton John biopic, Rocket Man, which both of those movies will star Taron Egerton. So, definitely, well, I mean, we'll get into whether or not I thought it was a good movie, and it definitely, I don't know. I'll save that for the story. But, essentially, this movie chronicles the rise of the rock band Queen, most notably their lead singer Freddie Mercury, leading up to their iconic performance at Live Aid. So, I don't know about you, Tyler, but I have not ever had to say the words Bohemian Rhapsody before, and I learned going into this movie and reviewing this movie, I was very nervous to review it because it turns out my speech impediment comes back when I try to say Bohemian Rhapsody, and I've had to practice it like all week so I wouldn't mess it up on the podcast. So yeah, I learned that about myself. My wife thought it was pretty hilarious because at first I think she thinks that I'm joking when I like can't say something and I just say it funny, and I'm like, I'm really like, she's laughing at me and it's not helping because I'm freaking out. I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to say this. Like, I can't keep saying it. Like, I'm the one that has to say all this stuff. And, like, I was basically having a full on meltdown, but I practiced a lot and I figured out how to say it. So I'm quite proud of myself.
That's a lot to process, man.
Yeah, I was having a little bit of a breakdown because I've never had to say those words before. And, apparently I'm not great at it. I don't know what it is about the word rhapsody, but I cannot say it. I want to say the S sound first for some reason. I don't know. It's real weird. But
did you say rhapsody?
Yeah, I probably said that in the many times that I said it wrong. It's very, very weird, but I had to practice it. So I know we make a lot of jokes about us not really doing much research and much prep going into these episodes, but I did have to do prep, and most of it was me just saying the word Rhapsody over and over again because I'm a fucking weirdo. So anyways, I don't know about you, Tyler. I don't think we've talked about this much, but I really loved Queen growing up. Bohemian Rhapsody was one of my favorite songs growing up. I remember we used to go on these long car rides because we used to go to Florida for spring break every year when I was in like junior high and high school, and we'd go because my family loves baseball, and they'd always do spring training in Florida. And so we would drive from Indiana to Florida every spring break. And I always remember we'd listen to classic rock, and I would always wait for any Queen song really, but especially that song. I would always get really excited when that song would come on. And, I was nervous, so I had my reservations that this show or this movie was going to work because of all of the problems it had in production, not just with Singer. And we've had plenty of other examples of how, like, firing directors mid-movie doesn't really help the movie. Like, it definitely has its problems, and we'll get into whether or not this movie had the problems or not. But even before that, like, Sacha Baron Cohen was originally set to star in this, and he dropped out because there was some creative differences with the former, well, I guess they're not former, they still tour, but the other members of Queen and what they wanted this movie to be and kind of what he wanted this movie to be. And so even though I was really excited because I love Queen, I was kind of nervous going into this movie.
Yeah, so I think we've talked about it a time or two on the podcast. I mean, we don't really dive into music too much, but I was raised on classic rock, and that has carried over with me to adulthood for sure, 100%. And you and I talk a lot about how we differentiate favorite from best. So at the end of the year, we do a top 10 favorite movie list, and we always say that this is not necessarily the movies we think are the best. These are the movies that we consider to be our favorites. So Queen is not my favorite band of all time, but in my opinion, Queen is the best band of all time, and Bohemian Rhapsody is probably the best song of all time. Definitely my favorite song of all time. And I know that that's like a pretty big thing to say, and a lot of people would disagree, and people like my wife would say, no, it's the Beatles, but I just don't think enough bands changed their style and got so experimental with their music like Queen did. And I think that it worked really well for them, and that Freddie Mercury is the best frontman of all time. So with all of that being said, obviously I was excited for this movie because I do love Queen. But on the flip side of that, I fucking hate Bryan Singer. He's a piece of shit person.
Yeah.
And so that is where my reservations came from. And of course, him getting fired before the movie was over and just hearing about how erratic he was on the set made me pretty nervous for this movie that it was going to hold together.
Yeah, I'm surprised that we've never had that conversation. Like, I assumed, I mean, I know that you're a big Motley Crue fan, you're a big Metallica fan, so, I mean, it kind of made sense that you would be be a fan of Queen as well, because I know that you do listen to classic rock. I mean, I guess Metallica is not really, well, it's classic rock now, but, it wasn't when we were growing up, because we're old. But, I mean, I guess it makes sense. It just never has, I don't think it's ever come up. But, I mean, we're both big fans of Queen, obviously. So, if this is your first episode, we'd like to break down each review, kind of like what we do with each episode as a whole, as we break it up into segments. And the first segment is just kind of a general overview of what we felt, whatever we're reviewing. We call it broad strokes. So, how do you feel about Bohemian Rhapsody? I'm going to say it wrong eventually. It's going to happen. I'm forcing myself to say it over and over again. I don't know why, but eventually I will embarrass myself.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it. So this movie is by no means perfect. There are definitely places in the story that I lost a little interest, especially after finding out that a lot of important plot points are fabricated. But when I walked out of the theater after seeing this movie, I walked out in a great mood because I think that honestly, it was just, it's going to sound really dumb, but it's the power of the music of Queen. This movie may have not been everything I wanted necessarily, but I think that it was a decent celebration of a great band. And like I said, the greatest frontman of all time. And I loved that. I loved it from that point of view. It's one of those movies where I can definitely see all of its flaws, but I choose to like it anyways. An easy comparison would be to compare this to A Star Is Born. I just went through this whole thing before we got into broad strokes about how we differentiate favorite from best, and the comparison to Star Is Born, I would say, is that The Star Is Born is a better made movie, and it's a better movie. But if I had to rank them from favorite standpoints, I would rank Bohemian Rhapsody above this movie, because it's my favorite of the two, and it celebrates a band that I love. So, I don't know. I'm a little torn because it doesn't hold together kind of like I thought it was going to. But at the end of the day, I think the music of Queen and the charisma of Rami Malek kind of saves it in some spots.
So we'll get into performances and how I feel like he did as Freddie Mercury. But I was honestly, after I got out of this film, I was actually a little bummed. Like, I really loved the music, and we'll get into the story, and that was actually, spoiler alert, my favorite part of the movie was where they were, like, coming up with the songs and performing and stuff like that. But we'll get into that here in a little bit. But for me, the thing that bothered me the most about this movie is it surprised me that a film that made such an effort to point out how Queen was so different and risked so much to be different would play it so safe. There will never be another Freddie Mercury, and I think that shines through in this film. But unfortunately, as far as a rock biopic is concerned, it just felt like it was cut and paste. Like, I really honestly, like, I kept thinking while I was watching this movie, if you strip down this movie and strip down, like, a movie like The Runaways, which I don't know if you ever watched that biopic, but it was pretty good. If you strip down both of those movies, obviously the subject matter is way different because they're about two different bands. But, like, as far as the movie's concerned, like, the foundation of those movies are pretty much the same. Like, it kind of goes through the same paces. And that was what really bothered me about this movie, is that you have this band that, I mean, just risked everything, never really wanted to fall into that formula. And they even have a scene where they talk about that. And it made such an effort to talk about how Queen was like that. But then as a film, and this might kind of go back to what we were talking about with the different directors, this film just kind of fell into the formula of making a rock biopic, which for me was a shame because it's such a unique band that wanted to do things basically their own way, and to not have that be part of the film just felt very disappointing to me.
Gotcha.
All right, so story-wise, how'd you feel about Bohemian Rhapsody?
So, like I mentioned in broad strokes, the story is definitely hit or miss, but I think it struggles the most through the middle. Once Queen has found fame and you go through the tropes of the band being at odds with one another and Freddie beginning to get reckless with his life, the story really falls apart a bit for me. Things feel very forced, and like I mentioned, there are a lot of tropes that the story goes through that are definitely common in this genre. So I thought it was interesting that in your broad strokes, you said that this movie did not take risks, and I 100% agree with that. It kind of goes through the motions that you see in a lot of biopics. What's worse is that if you do a bit of research, it seems like a lot of the strife and the drama that was made up for the middle part of this movie, and it's fabricated for dramatic effect, which I thought was really disappointing. For example, Freddie didn't know that he had AIDS when he played Live Aid, and the band weren't at odds with one another or even split up before that performance, which is like the big anchor of the movie. So that makes a good portion of this film feel cheap for me, which is super disappointing because I think Freddie Mercury deserves better than what we were given to us in that section of the story. Also, a few of other things felt forced. You can definitely tell where Roger Taylor and Brian May had a hand in this movie and what they wanted it to be. Those are, of course, the two living members of Queen. The bassist is still alive, but he doesn't associate himself with the band anymore outside of finances. So, for example, it felt like the entire segment of them writing "We Will Rock You," like that's great. Like I loved seeing them make the music because it shows insight to the song. But in the grand scheme of things, it slowed the story down and it wasn't needed. And I feel like it was just there because their guitarist wanted to show that he was the writer of We Will Rock You. And I might be wrong, but that's the impression I got. Also, the other three members of Queen are made to look like the good guys at certain points, which seemed like a stretch to me. And I think it's because of, again, the input of the living band members, but that's, I guess, speculation on my part. With all of that being said, obviously, I did say in broad strokes that I love this movie. And while a majority of that is because of the music, I did like how the story begins and ends in this film. I think the formation of Queen is really great, as well as watching them make the rounds as struggling artists. And I also loved watching them make the music, especially Bohemian Rhapsody. I love that whole segment that kind of takes place on that farm where they're recording that album. I think that that's great. All of that stuff hit for me. And I wish that that tone and insight would have continued throughout the rest of the movie. I also loved how the film wrapped up. It's a pretty long movie, but I thought it was awesome that they pretty much recreated the entire 24-minute Live Aid performance in its entirety. I thought that that was a good choice to end the film with. And as always, it's easy to dwell on the things that I didn't like, but I would say for me, there was more from a standpoint that hit for me than what didn't hit.
Oh yeah, so I completely agree with you on pretty much all the points that you made, especially the band members having a lot of input. That was something that Sacha Baron Cohen, that I mentioned earlier, that's why he left, was that he wanted to make, essentially what I've read is that he wanted to make more of a Freddie Mercury biopic, and the members of Queen were like, nope, we own the music, so if you want to make this movie, you're going to make it about us and not just Freddie Mercury. And so that's why he ended up leaving. And you definitely feel that in a couple of spots. And I definitely totally agree with you, what you said about them kind of being the good guys. And I'm glad that you brought that up because I hadn't thought of that until you had mentioned it right now. And I think it's a really good point. They definitely feel like they're the ones that are just like, oh, they're holding the band together. Like Freddie's was the crazy guy that, like, he broke us up essentially, but now we were really patient with him and we were really the good guys. And that's why Queen is so good, is because we were the good guys essentially. And I definitely think that it's a really good point because it's, definitely feels like they had more of a hand in this movie than you would like. So the thing that I want to talk about first, and it's kind of my biggest gripe with the movie, other than the things that you mentioned, was there's a bit of a controversy surrounding this film. So, obviously Freddie Mercury is famously gay, and I think a lot of people, especially in the early reviews, have been accusing this, film as being, I guess what they're calling it, straight washing. And I knew that going in, and I was actually really nervous because I was afraid that they were just going to completely gloss over the fact that he was gay. And me being a straight guy, like, I can't imagine what it would be like growing up as being a gay guy. And I'm sure that if you liked the music of Queen growing up and you were gay, like, that would mean even more to you. So going into this movie, knowing that I don't necessarily think that they glossed over it. There was plenty of that in this movie, at least from my perspective. But the thing that bothered me the most, like, after I watched this movie, I was like, oh, well, I didn't think it was that bad. Like, they definitely bring up him being gay, and they definitely bring up him having AIDS and that struggle a little bit. Like, it's kind of towards the end of the film, and it's actually, I'm glad that you brought it up, is that they kind of made it sound like the Live Aid was like his last hurrah. And he wasn't actually diagnosed for, like, I think 2 years after that performance even happened. So that was definitely fabricated. But, that definitely bothered me a lot. But the thing that bothered me the more I thought about this film was the fact that, so I do know a little bit about Freddie Mercury because I am a fan of Queen, and he was kind of married at one point to this woman that they mention it early in the film. And what really kind of bothered me about this movie, when I started really thinking about it and sitting down and really digesting the film, is the fact that when Queen started, like, he was dating this woman and then they get engaged in the movie. I don't know if they were ever really engaged in real life or not, but I know that she was a fixture of his life, his entire life, essentially. And it felt like the band was going really well. and then Freddie became gay. Like, he decided to come out as gay. And then that's when shit really started going bad for him. And it felt like it was almost, and I don't want to accuse the film of doing this, like purposely doing this, but it definitely felt like they framed it like, almost like a cautionary tale. Like, this is what happens if you're gay. Like, that's almost kind of how it felt like to me, is that as soon as he started being gay, the band fell apart. And I mean, there is some drug use and stuff like that, but they don't hit that as hard as him being gay. And that really bugged me, and I'm sure that it obviously is bugging a lot of people. So, yeah, that was the thing that kind of bugged me the most about this film. I do really, really like the music and how they wrote some of the music, and definitely those scenes on the farm were probably the best of the movie. I do disagree a little bit with the We Will Rock You thing. I still thought that was fun. I liked the Another One Bites the Dust, where he starts playing the riff, the bass riff. I thought that was a pretty cool scene, but it definitely, I mean, you bringing it up, it does feel like it was like, hey, I want to kind of get credit for some of this stuff that we wrote all these iconic songs, and it definitely does feel like that guy's taking credit for it. But that didn't necessarily bother me because I like those scenes quite a lot. I will say that them performing together was some of also my favorite moments of the movie, and we'll get into the performances later, not just the performances by the actors, but by the performances of the band together in the movie. So I'll save that for a little bit later, but I want to say that they do kind of build up the performance for Live Aid, and like they were really like nervous and all this stuff. Well, first of all, that never, like, they had been playing together. They were actually on tour. They had to cancel, like, pause their tour to do this performance. So that wasn't true at all. But you knew that they were going to do it, because I hate flash forwards. Flash forwards are stupid and they're tropey and we shouldn't use them anymore. But you see at the very beginning of the movie, you see him about to perform at Live Aid. So like all of this drama and tension that they're trying to build at beginning the third act doesn't really work, because we already know, and that's why I hate flash forwards, is we already know everything's going to work out. So why are you trying to pretend like it isn't? So that kind of bugged me as well. But we'll get into the actual performances here in a little bit.
Like right now?
Yeah, like right now.
Perfect. So performance-wise, I don't have a ton of complaints. I was nervous going into the movie because it was obvious that Rami Malek wouldn't be singing, because even if he is a good singer, he wouldn't sound like Freddie. But I'm happy to say that even though he was dubbed, it didn't necessarily feel that way. He is getting a lot of praise for his performance here, and while I don't think I'll be campaigning for him to get an Oscar nod or anything like that, I do think that he did a really great job, especially during the performances that are shown. As far as everyone else goes, I'd say that everyone else is fine. I think Lucy Boynton, who plays Mary, I think that she was great. I think that the rest of the band members were also great. It's kind of funny, I didn't recognize him, but the bassist, the guy who plays John Deacon, is the kid from Jurassic Park.
Yep.
Which I thought was pretty funny. Let's see, Aidan Gillen is in this movie. You'll know him as Littlefinger from Game of Thrones. He continues to deliver the same performance in everything he does, but he's fine here. Tom Hollander plays Miami Beach, aka Jim Beach. He was fine. I was kind of nervous that Mike Myers was in this movie, but he's in like one or two scenes, and I don't think that he was bad by any stretch of the imagination. There's obviously a pretty inside joke to Wayne's World in this movie, and I could see how it could be cringeworthy for some people, but I thought it was funny, and I kind of laughed whenever he made that joke. But yeah, I mean, this is a long way of saying that I didn't really have any complaints about the performances here.
Yeah, I think him as Freddie Mercury, I mean, he's already in Mr. Robot, so I guess he already has like a iconic performance, like a career-defining performance already in him. But I thought that this is probably, from now on, this is what people are going to associate with him. I wouldn't necessarily say that he deserves an Oscar by any means, but I thought he did a really, really good job. So, yeah, I pretty much agree with everything that you said. There was nobody that stood out to me as being bad or being spectacular other than Freddie Mercury. So, and I don't know how to pronounce his name. That's why I'm purposely not saying his name. But in case you were curious, I do think that they did a really good job with Mike Myers because it's kind of hard to tell it's even Mike Myers. Like, you get it a little bit, you get a little fat bastard in his voice a time or two when he's talking. But other than that, like, they did his makeup and they, like, I don't know if there was any prosthetics or anything like that, but you can't even tell it's Mike Myers. Like, so if it wasn't for his voice, I wouldn't have known that that was him. So I thought that they did a good job because that could have been very distracting. It was also very distracting that I couldn't figure out where that guy I knew that guy from. That was Tim in Jurassic Park. Like, it really bugged me. I couldn't place it the whole fucking movie. So every time he was on screen, I was like, where the fuck do I know that guy from? And then I was looking it up as we were driving home. I wasn't driving because I don't do that while I drive, but my wife was driving. And I looked it up and I was like, oh, he's Tim from Jurassic Park. And so that made sense. I think everybody else was good. Did you catch the Adam Lambert cameo?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, he was the truck driver that, like, goes into the bathroom at one point. That's Adam Lambert.
Was that really?
Yeah. I didn't know that. I didn't catch it when I was watching it either. I saw, like, a little article about it. Do you think it's common knowledge? Because I had this conversation with my wife last night after we watched the movie. Do you know, is it common knowledge that he's the lead singer of Queen now?
I mean, to me.
Yeah.
My wife knows too. I mean,
my wife didn't know. I was like, oh, Adam Lambert was in the movie. She's like, who gives a shit about Adam Lambert? And I was like, yes, I agree with what you just said. But at the same time, he is the lead singer of Queen. So it's kind of like a cute cameo.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess it's not common knowledge. I mean, they call, he's not really part of Queen. They say Queen plus Adam Lambert.
They did that with the guy from Bad Company too, when he was the lead singer as well, because they're not replacing Freddie Mercury. So it's just Queen plus Adam Lambert, or Queen plus, the guy has like a generic name. It's like Paul Rogers or something like that. I don't remember.
Yeah, fuck, what is his name? That's gonna bother me, but
it's Paul something. It's like Paul Allen or Paul Rogers or something like. He has a very generic name, but they always have to frame it in a way that they're not replacing Freddie.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is kind of silly, by the way. But unless you have anything about performances, let's go into the music. Obviously, the music was great because it's Queen's music, but how do you think they did as far as performing it as a band?
For me, that was the highlight of the movie. I love the music, but the concert scenes were done very, very well. Especially, I think, Live Aid. I know I mentioned it in the story, but I think that was especially impressive because they pretty much got the choreography down of exactly how that performance went, which was awesome. And then I think Rami Malek, I mean, maybe this is more of a performance thing, but his choreography for all of the concert scenes were great. Like, he felt like Freddie Mercury on stage, and the rest of the band didn't have too much to do. They just stood there and played their instruments. But I thought that those scenes were filmed really well, and I especially liked the montage of them going through the United States the first time, and there were some really cool shots through that of them playing as well. So definitely the highlight for me. I wish there was more of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought that it was fantastic. Other than maybe them writing the music, like in the studio, I think the performances, especially Live Aid, was the best that this movie gave us. Unfortunately, like you said, there's not as much in there as I wanted. Like, that montage is really cool, but as it was going on, I was like, I kind of just want to see this. Like, don't give me the montage. Give me the actual, like, performance. Like, it would kind of give you little snippets of each concert. And I mean, I get that, keep the movie moving, but at the same time, I was like, I really like this. I want to see more of this. So I was a little bit disappointed that we got more, like, sappy Freddie Mercury, like, sitting alone in his house, than we got them actually performing together. That was a little bit of a bummer. I get that they're trying to build up the character of Freddie Mercury, and I'm sure he was actually like that at times, but it kind of bummed me out that we got more of that towards the end of this film than we did actually them performing, which kind of bummed me out.
For sure.
All right. So unless you have anything else, I think it's time to give it a star rating.
So this might blow your mind a little bit, and rightfully so, but I'm going to give it 4 stars.
Yeah. I couldn't forgive some of the story aspects that we talked about, especially the one them the way that they framed this movie really bugged me the more I thought about it. So I'm going to give 3 stars. I liked it. I mean, I definitely am recommending it, especially if you're a Queen fan. I think you will enjoy it. But there was people that applauded after this movie was over. And I'm just like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, did we watch the same movie?
There's been a pretty big divide between critics and audiences with this movie. And I think it just comes down to everyone loves Queen and nobody wants to say this movie's bad. And I'm part of that. Like, I love Queen, and the parts that I like resonated with me a lot more than the parts that I didn't like. So I think that that's where I'm coming from here.
Oh yeah, for sure. So I loved Queen, but for me, I expected and I wanted more, because we're probably never going to get another Queen biopic, and this was it. And this is all we have. And I just feel like the problems with the production and stuff like that definitely hindered this movie quite a lot.
Yeah, we'll see what happens whenever the rest of Queen dies. We'll be like, hey, this is the real story. Maybe we'll get that.
Yeah, for sure. So what is nerd favorite this week?
So pretty on the nose, favorite biopic. So I'll give you a sec to think of yours, and I will go through mine. So I'm stuck choosing between 2. Either, and what's funny is they're both directed by Martin Scorsese. So either Goodfellas or The Wolf of Wall Street. I love both of those movies. I think that kind of going back to the best versus favorite, I think that Goodfellas is the better movie, but I think that my favorite between the two would have to be Wolf of Wall Street. I don't know why. That movie was my favorite the year it came out.
I also don't know why, because I don't particularly like that movie that much.
Yeah, I think that that's a common opinion on it too. But for whatever reason, I love that movie. I love Leonardo DiCaprio's performance in it. I think Margot Robbie's great in it. Jonah Hill is hilarious in it. I think that it's just a really, really great balance of humor, dark humor, and of course drama. So I think I said it whenever this movie was nominated for Best Comedy at the Golden Globes. Like, yeah, it's really hilarious whenever there's multiple scenes of a guy abusing his wife. So I definitely don't consider it a comedy, but when it's funny, it is funny. And it's a movie that's super long, but again, that I've watched a few times and have come to really enjoy. So I guess I'll go Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to obviously bash you about your choice for your nerd favorite. I never connected with that movie in the way that I thought I was going to. I think we actually might have talked about it because it came out towards the end of the year, if I'm not mistaken, like around Christmas. And we put a lot of stock into our like top 10 every year, that episode that we do with Matt Hurt from The Obsessive Viewer. And I think I even might have brought it up. Like, I was saving a spot for that movie going into it, and it never works out. I don't know why I do that. Like, when I build a movie up like that, there's no way that it's ever going to meet those expectations. Very few times does it ever meet that expectations. So I should just stop doing that, because anytime I go into a movie like, this could be it. This is a contender for my favorite movie of not all time, but of the year. And it never adds up to that. So, yeah, maybe that had definitely played a part in why I just didn't really like Wolf of Wall Street, but I mean, I haven't even watched it since, so I don't really, it's not that I don't trust my opinion of it, but I'd like to watch it again, because I do have a few other people that I know that like that movie quite a lot as well, so I was like, maybe it was just my high expectations.
Yeah, definitely give it another watch if you haven't seen it since.
Yeah, I will eventually, but like you said, it is a very long movie, so.
All right, man, so what is your favorite?
So it kind of feels strange because there's so many biopics, and generally when you think of a biopic, you think of something that, like Bohemian Rhapsody, which I made it through this entire episode without stuttering or saying it wrong. So congratulations to me, I guess, where it's something that happened years ago, like decades ago. But the thing that I want to talk about, the movie that I want to talk about, is a movie that I kind of felt like was special because it happened within our generation. So I want to talk about The Social Network. So you can't ever really go wrong when you have a movie written by Aaron Sorkin, directed by David Fincher. Like, no matter what happens, that movie is not going to be bad. Like, there's no way that those two dudes can make a quote unquote bad movie. So I knew I was going to like that movie going in, but it's far and away Jesse Eisenberg's best performance. And it's just a fantastic story about how Facebook got started. This thing that has like taken over people's lives. Like within our generation, we saw the evolution of Facebook, starting from something that when I went to college freshman year, like I just kind of heard like little like rumblings about it. Cause I think it came out like the summer or maybe like right before I went to college. Like I think it had started like the year before, and then so it was like picking up steam the summer before my freshman year of college. So I remember I got it like halfway through that semester or something like that, my fall semester, my freshman year. So I've had it essentially since the beginning, and it started as this thing that only college students could have, and then high school students could have, and now everybody can have. And so I like the movie because it shows you how it got started, something that has changed people's lives over the course of the last, 13 years. I think it came out in 05, 04, something like that. So, and it's just an interesting story. Like I said, there's no way that those two dudes can make a bad movie working together. So, Social Network, definitely another movie that I need to rewatch again. I've seen it a million times, but, yeah, it's definitely a movie that I should revisit.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen that movie in a few years either, so I'll have to rewatch it as well.
For sure. So that's it for episode 214 of the Nerds You're Looking For podcast. As always, I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, subscribe, rate, review us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, basically any good podcatcher you use. Also, we really appreciate if you... I get why you wouldn't want to review us, because that does take a little bit, but if you just give us a quick rating, that helps us. Eventually we can become a certified critic on Rotten Tomatoes. I think that would be kind of funny. I don't know. I would just get a kick out of that. But anyways, you can also find all of our content on our website, thenerdspodcast.com. You can also comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Nerds You're Looking For. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram. They're both at The Nerds Podcast. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Google+. You can also email us at thenerdsyourlookingfor@gmail.com. And then finally, vote for us for Podcast of the Month at podcastland.com. For Patrick Kuhn,
Tyler Hunt.
we are The Nerds You're Looking For. Take it easy, nerds.
Later, guys.